6 months had passed since the Battle of Velith, and the galaxy had changed in ways that no one had predicted. The Velith Collective had been resettled across 3 colony worlds, their 12 billion citizens given new homes through a massive relocation effort that humans had organized and funded without asking for anything. In return, the agricultural knowledge of the Velith had already begun, transforming barren worlds into productive farmland, and the gentle mantis-like beings had become the most devoted allies humanity had ever known. But the changes extended far beyond the Velith observer. Thrynix stood before the Galactic Council, their crystalline body now permanently marked with patterns of blue and gold that had not existed before their time aboard the human fleet. "My final report," they announced, "concerns not just the events at Velith, but the implications for our entire galactic civilization." The chamber was silent as Thrynix spoke. "For centuries, we have operated under the assumption that survival depends on careful calculation of costs and benefits," Thrynix said. "We have built treaties and alliances based on mutual advantage, and we have measured the worth of species by their strategic value." They paused, letting the words sink in. "The humans have shown us a different path." Footage played across the main display, not of the battle, but of its aftermath. Human soldiers helping Velith families rebuild on colony worlds. Medical teams treating injuries months after the evacuation Admiral Park, personally attending the funeral of every one of the 432 humans who had died in the battle. They did not help the Velith because it benefited them. Thrynix continued. They helped because helping was the right thing to do, and they were willing to pay any price to do what was right. Representative Vorthel shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "And what has this cost them?" he asked. 17 ships and hundreds of lives for strangers. "It is admirable, perhaps, but hardly sustainable." "You misunderstand," Thrynix replied. "The humans did not weaken themselves through sacrifice. They strengthened themselves beyond anything we can easily counter." The chamber stirred with confusion. The Velith are now bound to humanity through loyalty that no treaty could create, Thrynix explained. "Other species are watching what the humans did, and they are asking themselves a simple question. If we needed help, would anyone come for us? And the answer frightens them," Ambassador Thesic said slowly, understanding dawning in her shifting features. "Yes," Thrynix confirmed. "Because for most of the galaxy, the answer is no. And that realization is changing everything." The report was dismissed shortly after, but its impact rippled through the council in the following weeks. The Mordith Concordat announced a new initiative to fund refugee assistance programs, citing humanitarian concerns rather than strategic calculations. The Telosi Federation quietly began training medical response teams for deployment to crisis zones beyond their borders. Even the Kreth Empire, long considered the most ruthlessly practical power in the galaxy, announced that they would extend protection to 3 vulnerable species in their region of space. No one admitted that they were trying to match what the humans had done. No one needed to on the colony world of New Velith. Admiral Una Park walked through fields of golden grain that stretched to the horizon. Her injuries from the battle had healed, though the scars would remain for the rest of her life. High Matriarch Seluvis walked beside her, and the Velith leader carried something carefully in her upper arms. "This seedling," Seluvis explained, "comes from the great garden of our homeworld, the oldest living plant in Velith history. Over 12,000 years of continuous growth." She held it out toward Park with reverent care. "We rescued it during the evacuation because a human soldier saw it and decided it was worth saving," she continued. "He carried it in his arms for 6 hours while helping others board the shuttles." Park accepted the seedling gently, feeling the weight of its history. "What would you have me do with it?" she asked. "Plant it in your soil," Seluvis replied. "Let it grow on Earth as a symbol of the bond between our peoples. And let every human Who sees it remember what your kind did for mine. Park looked at the small plant, and memories of the battle flooded back. She thought of Ensign Kim, whose final transmission had been a joke about missing his mother's cooking. She thought of Commander Han, who had survived against all odds and now commanded his own ship. She thought of 432 names carved into a memorial that would stand forever on New Velith. We will plant it, she promised, and we will remember. The ceremony took place 3 weeks later. Broadcast across every communication network in the galaxy, Ambassador Dongyun Cho stood before a vast crowd on the grounds of the United Earth Government Complex. The Velith seedling in a pot of carefully prepared soil beside him. Today, we plant more than a tree, he announced. We plant a promise. He knelt and carefully transferred the seedling into the ground, his movements slow and respectful. This seedling represents 12 billion lives that the galaxy decided were not worth saving, he said. And it represents 432 humans who disagreed with that calculation so strongly that they gave their lives to prove it wrong. He stood and faced the cameras that carried his image to billions of viewers across known space. Some call us ruthless, he said. And perhaps they are right, but not in the way they mean. He gestured toward the seedling, now standing in Earth soil for the first time in its 12,000-year existence. We are ruthless in our compassion, he declared. Ruthless in our protection of the innocent. Ruthless in our refusal to let good people die alone while we have the power to save them. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. Let the galaxy remember what happened at Velith, Cho continued. Let them remember that when no one else would answer, humans came. And let them decide what kind of neighbors they want to be. He stepped back from the podium, and the ceremony ended in applause that echoed across light years. In the months that followed, the galaxy continued to change. Distress calls that once would have been ignored now received responses. Species that had never interacted began forming. Connections based on mutual assistance rather than mutual benefit. The old calculations of worth and value slowly gave way to something new. Something that the humans had carried with them since the first time one of their ancestors had helped a stranger in need. Observer Threnix, now promoted to senior ambassador, filed their final assessment of the human species with the Galactic Council. They are exactly what we feared, Threnix wrote, and exactly what we needed. They are ruthless in ways we are only beginning to understand, and I believe that ruthlessness will save us all. The seedling from Velith grew in Earth soil, its roots reaching deep into alien ground and above it. The stars held a galaxy that was finally learning what humanity had always known, that the measure of a civilization is not in its power or its wealth or its influence, but in how it answers when someone cries out for help. The humans had given their answer at Velith. The galaxy was still deciding on theirs. Only the ruthless humans responded. The Galactic Council was stunned. Galactic Council chamber erupted into chaos as reports from the Velith system flooded every communication channel. Representatives from 47 species watched in stunned silence as footage played across the main display, showing human warships engaging the craft swarm with weapons and tactics that defied every convention of civilized warfare. Nuclear explosions bloomed like deadly flowers against the darkness of space. Human ships flew directly into swarm formations on suicide runs. The biological agents spread through the enemy ranks like a plague, turning coordinated billions into confused and scattered fragments. And at the center of it all, Admiral Una Park commanded her fleet with the calm precision of someone who had already accepted death and found peace with the decision. This is barbarism, Representative Vorthel of the Kesni Union declared, his crystalline body pulsing with agitated colors. The humans are using weapons banned by 17 different treaties. They are also winning. Observer Threnix replied through the communication link from the Resolute. The swarm is fragmenting, and the evacuation continues as we speak. At what cost? Ambassador Desic demanded. 17 human ships have already been destroyed, and hundreds of their people are dead for a species that offers them nothing in return. The chamber fell silent as another human ship disappeared from the tactical display. Consumed by the swarm it had been holding back 400 lives gone in an instant, yet the humans kept fighting. The footage shifted to show the evacuation. Operations continuing on the Velith homeworld human. Soldiers carried elderly. Velith the shuttles with gentle hands medical teams treated. Injuries with professional care officers coordinated. The movement of billions with efficiency. That seemed almost mechanical, and all of this happened while their comrades died in space. Above them, I do not understand, Desic said quietly, her shifting form reflecting her confusion. Why do they continue when the cost is so high? Threnix's voice came through the communication channel, and there was something different in their tone. Something that sounded almost like respect. I asked Commander Han that question, Threnix reported. His answer was simple. He said that humans remember being alone, and they remember when no one came to help them. And they decided long ago that they would never let that happen to anyone else if they had the power to prevent it. Sentiment. Vorthal dismissed. Emotional nonsense that has no place in strategic calculation. And yet here we are. A new voice interrupted the chamber, turned to see human ambassador Dong Yun. Cho stepping forward to the speaker's platform. He was a tall man with silver hair and eyes that had seen decades of service to his people. His uniform was simple, lacking the elaborate decorations that other species used to display rank and status. Ambassador Cho, the council president, acknowledged. You were not scheduled to speak today. No, Cho agreed. But I believe the council deserves an explanation for human actions. Given that so many of you seem confused by what you are witnessing, he gestured toward the display, where another human ship was engaging the swarm at close range. You call us ruthless, Cho said calmly. You put that word in our files and whisper it in your council meetings. And you use it to justify treating us with suspicion and fear. Your history speaks for itself, Vorthal countered. Endless wars, weapons of mass destruction, predatory biology. These are not characteristics of a civilized species. You are correct, Cho acknowledged. Our history is violent, and we have committed terrible acts against our own kind. And we carry the weight of those mistakes with us always. He paused. And when he spoke again, his voice was harder. But you mistake our nature, he continued. Humans are not violent because we enjoy destruction. We are violent because we evolved to protect what we love against a hostile universe. He pointed at the display. You see ruthlessness in that footage, he said. I see 400 people who chose to die so that strangers could live. I see soldiers treating wounded aliens with the same care they would show their own families. I see a fleet commander who accepted certain death because she refused to abandon people who asked for help. The chamber was silent. The Velith called out into the void. Cho continued. They begged for mercy from a galaxy that had decided they were not worth saving. And every great civilization represented in this chamber turned away. His eyes swept across the gathered representatives. You calculated their worth in resources and strategic value. And you found them wanting. And you condemned 12 billion innocent beings to death because saving them offered you no benefit. Shame flickered across several faces. Though others remained defiant, humans heard the same call, Cho said. And we did not calculate worth or demand payment or cite treaties as excuses for inaction. We simply came because someone needed help, at the cost of your own people, Desic pointed out. Yes, Cho agreed. That is what we call humanity, the willingness to sacrifice for others, the refusal to stand by while innocent people suffer. He stepped closer to the speaker's platform, and his presence seemed to fill the chamber despite his relatively small size. "You fear us because we are willing to die for strangers," he said. "You should fear what that says about yourselves." The chamber erupted into angry voices and defensive accusations. But Cho simply stood in silence and waited for the noise to subside when it did. He spoke one final time. "The battle is ending," he reported. "The swarm has been broken, and the Velith evacuation is nearly complete. And we have lost 17 ships and 432 people in the process." He looked directly at the council president. "When historians write about this day, they will not remember the great powers who debated while innocents died," he said. "They will remember the ruthless humans who answered a call for help and paid for it with blood." He turned and walked toward the exit. "Think about what that means for your legacy, and decide what kind of galaxy you want to build." The chamber remained silent long after he left in the display. The last fragments of the Krath swarm scattered into the void, and the human fleet began the long process of counting their dead in the observation deck of the Resolute. High Matriarch Saluvis knelt before Admiral Park, who had returned from the bridge after the battle ended. "I owe you a debt that can never be repaid," the matriarch said through tears. "You have saved my people, and you have lost so many of your own, and I do not know how to thank you." Park reached down and gently helped the matriarch to her feet. "No debt," she said softly. "You needed help, and we were able to give it. And that is enough. But your people died for us." "Yes," Park acknowledged, and grief flickered briefly in her eyes before she controlled it. "They knew the risk, and they chose to come anyway. And they would not want you to carry guilt for their choice." Saluvis stared at the human admiral, and she finally understood what the galaxy had been missing about these strange and terrifying creatures. They were not monsters. They were protectors, and the galaxy was only beginning to realize what that meant. The Krath swarm filled the tactical display like a dark stain spreading across the stars. And everyone on the bridge of the Resolute understood that they were looking at death itself. 40 billion organisms moved through space in a coordinated mass, each one a mindless eating machine driven by nothing but hunger. They had consumed hundreds of worlds over thousands of years, and no force in galactic history had ever stopped them. Admiral Una Park studied the display with calculating eyes, and her mind worked through possibilities that would have seemed insane to any other species. "Show me the composition analysis," she ordered. Lieutenant Soman Yeo pulled up the data, her fingers moving quickly across her console. "The swarm organisms are primarily organic with a silicate shell structure," she reported. "They communicate through chemical signals and coordinate their movements through a distributed network. But there is no central intelligence directing them, so they are essentially space locusts." Commander Jiziok Han observed. "Extremely dangerous space locusts," Eo agreed. "Their shells are resistant to conventional energy weapons, and their numbers make traditional combat tactics useless." Park nodded slowly. "What about their weaknesses?" "They need to consume organic matter to reproduce and maintain their numbers," Eo said. "And their chemical communication system is vulnerable to disruption, though no one has ever managed to exploit that weakness effectively. Until now," Park said quietly. She turned to face her senior officers, and her expression was calm despite the impossibility of the task before them. "I want all department heads in the briefing room in 10 minutes, she announced. "We are going to do something that has never been done before, and I need everyone thinking creatively." Observer Threnix followed the human officers to the briefing room, their crystalline body flickering with colors that indicated intense curiosity, mixed with growing dread. The meeting that followed would haunt Threnix for the rest of their existence. The traditional approach to the swarm is to flee or to throw ships at it until they run out of ammunition, Park began. "Neither option has ever worked. So we are going to try something different," She pulled up a schematic of the swarm's formation. The swarm coordinates through chemical signals. She continued, if we can disrupt those signals, we can fragment the swarm into smaller groups that can be destroyed piecemeal. How do we disrupt chemical signals in the vacuum of space? Han asked. We introduce competing signals, Park replied. Dr. Minji Cho has been working on a biological dispersal agent that mimics the swarm's communication. Chemicals, but sends conflicting instructions. A woman in a white coat stepped forward, and her face was lined with exhaustion, but her eyes burned with determination. The agent is experimental, Dr. Cho admitted. We developed it years ago as a theoretical countermeasure, but it has never been tested against a live swarm. Will it work? Park asked. It might, Cho replied honestly. Or it might make things worse, but I believe the probability of success is higher than the probability of failure. Good enough, Park said. What do you need to deploy it? We need to get the agent into the center of the swarm formation, Cho explained. The closer to the core, the more effective the disruption will be. That means someone has to fly into the swarm itself. Han said quietly. The room fell silent. Flying into the swarm was a death sentence. No ship that had ever entered a swarm formation had returned. Park looked around at her officers, and her voice was steady when she spoke. I need volunteers for a mission with a very low probability of survival, she said. We will be sending 3 ships loaded with the biological agent into the heart of the swarm, and the pilots will need to detonate their payloads manually to ensure deployment. Trinix expected hesitation or fear, but instead they saw hands rising across the room, not 1 or 2 hands, but dozens. I will go, Han said immediately. As will I, added Lieutenant Yeo. We cannot spare senior officers, Park said firmly. I need experienced pilots who understand that this is likely a one-way trip. Admiral, a young ensign spoke up from the back of the room. With respect, every pilot in this fleet would volunteer for this mission, and you will have to turn people away rather than convince them to go. Park studied the young man's face, and something shifted in her expression. What is your name? Ensign. Ensign Taiwu Kim, he replied. And I am volunteering. More voices joined his. And within minutes, Park had more volunteers than she could possibly use. Trinix watched this display with utter incomprehension. I do not understand, they said finally, loud enough for the room to hear. You are volunteering to die for strangers who mean nothing to you. And this makes no logical sense. The room turned to look at the alien observer, and it was Commander Han who answered, They are not strangers anymore, he said simply. They are people who needed help, and we answered. And now they are our responsibility. But you will die, Trinix protested. Maybe, Han acknowledged. But if we do, we will die protecting innocent lives. And that is a death worth having. Trinix felt their crystals shifting through colors they had no names. For this was the ruthlessness the galaxy feared, not cruelty toward enemies, but absolute dedication to protecting those they had claimed as their own. The humans would burn themselves to ash if it meant saving the Velith, and they would do it without hesitation or regret. The battle plan came together quickly after that. 3 ships would carry the biological agent into the swarm core, while the rest of the fleet provided covering fire and distraction. Nuclear warheads would be used to create gaps in the swarm formation, something the civilized galaxy considered barbaric but humans saw as simply practical. Additional ships would position themselves for ramming runs if the biological agent failed, creating physical barriers to slow the swarm's advance. It was a plan built on sacrifice and desperation, and it was completely insane by galactic standards. It was also the most hope anyone had ever had against the crass swarm. The next morning, the 3 volunteer ships launched. From the Resolute's hangar bay, Ensign Kim was aboard the lead ship. His young face calm on the communication screen. "Beginning approach to swarm perimeter," he reported. "We will maintain communication as long as possible, High Matriarch." Saluvis had insisted on watching the battle from the Resolute's observation deck, and tears streamed down her face as she watched the tiny ships heading toward the massive swarm. "Why do they do this?" she whispered to Threnix, who stood beside her. "Why do they sacrifice themselves for us?" Threnix had no answer. The volunteer ships disappeared into the swarm, and for long minutes there was only silence. Then the swarm began to fragment. Great sections of the formation broke away from the main body, moving in random directions as the biological agent disrupted their communication network. The human fleet advanced, nuclear weapons creating brilliant flowers of destruction that tore holes in the swarm's ranks. Ship after ship engaged the enemy with weapons that the Council had banned, and the swarm died by the billions. But it was not enough. The core of the swarm remained intact. Still heading toward the Velith homeworld, Admiral Park made a decision that would define humanity in the eyes of the galaxy. "All ships prepare for ramming protocol," she announced. "We will not let them through." On the observation deck, Matriarch Saluvis collapsed to her knees. These humans were going to destroy themselves to save her people. She had asked monsters for help. She had found heroes instead. The human fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel in perfect formation, and the Velith, watching from their orbital stations, felt a mixture of hope and fear at the sight. 17 warships bristled with weapons that gleamed under the light of the Velith sun, and 43 massive transport vessels followed behind them like a protective convoy. Admiral Una Park stood on the bridge of the flagship Resolute and studied the tactical display with sharp eyes. She was a small woman by human standards, her black hair streaked with gray and her face marked by decades of service in the depths of space. Her uniform was simple and practical, and she wore no decorations despite having earned many throughout her career. "Status report," she said calmly. "The swarm is 26 cycles out." Her tactical officer, Commander Jisiok Han, replied, "Current trajectory puts it directly through the Velith homeworld, and preliminary scans show approximately 40 billion individual organisms in the main cluster." Park nodded slowly as she processed this information and the evacuation capacity of the Velith. "Their own ships can handle perhaps 200,000 people at most," Han answered. "They were never a spacefaring culture in the military sense, and their vessels are designed for cargo transport rather than passenger evacuation." "Then we have work to do," Park said simply. "Begin landing operations immediately and coordinate with the Velith government for priority evacuation zones." The Council observer aboard the Resolute watched these proceedings with growing confusion. Threnix was a Mortith diplomat, their body a constantly shifting mass of crystalline structures that changed color based on emotional state. Currently, those crystals flickered between the purple of uncertainty and the blue of surprise. The Mortith had sent Threnix to document human behavior during this unprecedented intervention, expecting to gather evidence of human brutality or hidden motives. Instead, Threnix found themselves witnessing something entirely unexpected. "Admiral Park," Threnix said carefully. "May I ask a question?" Park turned to face the alien diplomat, and her expression remained professional and calm. "Of course." "Observer, your council file describes humans as ruthless and self-interested," Threnix said. "Every report suggests that your species acts only when there is clear benefit to yourselves. Yet you have traveled many light years to help a species that can offer you nothing in return." Park was quiet for a moment, and something flickered in her eyes that Threnix could not identify. "The Galactic Council has many opinions about humans," she said finally. "Most of them are based on fear rather than understanding, and I would suggest you form your own conclusions based on what you observe here, rather than what you have read in files. Before Threnix could respond, the communication officer announced an incoming transmission from the Velith. Homeworld High Matriarch Saluvis appeared on the main display, and her compound eyes glistened with what Threnix recognized as tears. "Admiral Park," the matriarch said with a trembling voice, "I am Saluvis, leader of the Velith Collective, and I do not have words sufficient to express our gratitude for your response. Save your gratitude until after we get your people to safety," Park replied, though her tone was gentle. "I need to ask you some questions so we can work efficiently, and I need honest answers even if they are difficult." "Of course," Saluvis replied. "How many of your people need evacuation, and how much time do we have?" The simplicity of the question seemed to surprise the matriarch. "We have 12 billion people on the homeworld, and another 3 billion across our colony worlds in the swarm's path," she said. "As for time, the swarm will reach our homeworld in 26 cycles." Park turned to her logistics officer. "Can we do it?" The officer, a young woman named Lieutenant Somin Yeo, ran calculations quickly. "If we strip the transport ships to maximum capacity and run continuous shuttle operations, we can evacuate approximately 9 billion before the swarm arrives," she reported. "But that assumes no complications and perfect efficiency." "Then we aim for perfect efficiency," Park said. "Begin landing operations now." Within hours, the skies above the Velith homeworld were filled with human shuttles descending in organized waves. Threnix accompanied one of the ground teams to observe the evacuation firsthand, and what they witnessed challenged everything they thought they knew about humans. The human soldiers moved through Velith villages with surprising gentleness. They helped elderly Velith board the shuttles with careful hands. They carried children who were too frightened to walk on their own. One human medic spent 20 minutes treating a Velith farmer's injured wing, even though time was precious and resources were limited. "Why do you do this?" Threnix asked Commander Han, who was overseeing operations in a small agricultural community. Han looked up from his work, his face streaked with dust and sweat. "Do what?" he asked. "Show such care for these people," Threnix clarified. "Your files describe humans as predators who view other species as either threats or resources. Yet I see your soldiers treating these Velith as though they were your own people." Han was quiet for a moment, and then he surprised Threnix by laughing softly. "The galaxy has strange ideas about humans," he said. "Yes, we are predators, and yes, our history is violent. But that is not the whole story." He gestured toward his soldiers, who were loading a group of Velith children onto a shuttle with patient smiles. "We evolved as social creatures," Han continued. "Our survival depended on protecting our families and communities. And somewhere along the way, the protective instinct expanded to include anyone we consider part of our group. But the Velith are not part of your group." Threnix pointed out. "They are now," Han said simply. "They asked for help, and we answered. And that makes them our responsibility." Threnix struggled to process this information. The Mortith operated on strict principles of exchange and mutual benefit, and the idea of taking responsibility for strangers simply because they asked for help was alien to their way of thinking back on the Resolute. Admiral Park received reports from all evacuation zones and made a decision that shocked the Council observer, Commander Han. She said over the communication channel, "What is the status of the colonial worlds?" "The swarm will reach them after the homeworld," Han reported. "We have perhaps 40 cycles before they are threatened. That is not enough time to evacuate everyone if we leave now," Park said. "We need to buy more time." "Admiral," Threnix interrupted, "are you suggesting that your fleet will stay and fight the swarm?" Park turned to face the diplomat, and her expression was calm but determined. "That is exactly what I am suggesting," she said. "But the swarm cannot be defeated. Threnix protested. Countless civilizations have tried over thousands of years, and all have failed. Then we will be the first to succeed, Park replied. Or we will die trying. But either way, we will give the Velith more time to escape. Threnix felt their crystals shift to the deep red of alarm. This is madness, they whispered. Admiral Park smiled. And for the first time, Threnix saw something fierce and dangerous in her eyes. Perhaps, she said, but it is the human kind of madness. And we have found that it often works when nothing else will. She turned back to her tactical display and began planning an attack against an enemy that had never been defeated. Threnix watched in silence, no longer certain what to believe about these strange and terrifying creatures who had come to save strangers at the edge of the galaxy. The transmission came through every emergency channel in the galaxy at the same moment, and the voice that spoke was filled with terror that needed no translation. This is High Matriarch Saluvis of the Velith Collective. The voice said, trembling with desperation, we are facing extinction, and we beg any species who hears this message to send help before it is too late. In the Great Chamber of the Galactic Council, representatives from 47 spacefaring civilizations watched the holographic display with expressions ranging from concern to complete indifference. The Velith were a peaceful species, their bodies resembling tall and slender mantises with wings, like stained glass and eyes that reflected light in beautiful patterns of violet and gold. They had joined the galactic community 300 years ago and had contributed nothing but agricultural techniques and gentle philosophy. In all that time, they had no military, no weapons, and no enemies. Now they faced something far worse than enemies. The holographic display shifted to show a massive cloud moving through space, and several council members leaned back in their seats with visible fear. The Krath's swarm had returned. It was not a species in the traditional sense, but rather a mindless cosmic phenomenon. Billions upon billions of creatures that moved through the galaxy like locusts across a field of grain. They consumed everything organic in their path, stripping entire worlds down to bare rock before moving on to the next feeding ground. The swarm appeared perhaps once every 1,000 years, and when it did, whatever lay in its path simply ceased to exist. The swarm will reach our homeworld in 47 standard cycles, the matriarch continued, her antennae drooping with exhaustion. We have 12 billion people and only enough ships to evacuate perhaps 200,000. And we have no weapons capable of fighting such a threat. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice cracked with emotion. We have nothing to offer in return for assistance, but we appeal to the mercy and compassion of the galactic community, and we pray that someone will answer our call. The transmission ended, and for a long moment, the council chamber was silent. Then the debates began. A tragedy, announced Representative Vorthel of the Kessni Union, his crystalline body pulsing with colors that indicated sympathy. But we cannot risk our own fleets against the swarm for a species that offers nothing strategic in return. The Velith are peaceful farmers, added Ambassador Desik of the Mordith Concordat, her form shifting uncomfortably. They produce excellent grain and nothing else. And while their loss would be unfortunate, we must consider the practical realities of the situation, one by one. The great powers of the galaxy offered their condolences and their excuses. The Tolosi Federation cited treaty obligations that prevented military intervention in non-member territories. The Kreth Empire simply stated that the Velith had never paid tribute and therefore deserved no protection. The Syndicate of Worlds calculated the cost of intervention and declared it economically unfeasible. Hours passed as the council debated, and with each passing moment, the swarm drew closer to 12 billion innocent lives in her chamber on the Velith homeworld. High Matriarch Saluvis watched the council proceedings with growing despair. She had expected reluctance. But this cold calculation of her people's worth in terms of resources and strategic value made her feel sick. Her aide, a young male named Kethril, approached her with hesitation in his steps. "Matriarch," he said quietly, "there is one more option, but it is considered unwise by our advisors." Saluvis turned to face him, and her exhaustion was evident in every line of her body. "What option remains when the galaxy has abandoned us?" she asked. Kethril lowered his voice even further. "The humans," he whispered. "We could broadcast on the restricted channels and ask them directly for help." The matriarch felt a chill run through her body. Despite the warmth of the room, humans were newcomers to the galactic stage, having achieved faster-than-light travel barely a century ago. In that short time, they had earned a reputation that made other species nervous. They called them the Ruthless ones. Human history was a tapestry of violence that shocked even the warrior cultures of the galaxy. Endless wars fought against their own kind, for reasons that seemed trivial to outside observers. Their biology was that of apex predators, with forward-facing eyes designed to track prey and bodies built for endurance hunting. They ate the flesh of other creatures and seemed to find nothing disturbing about this practice. Most troubling of all was their psychology, a strange combination of pack bonding and territorial aggression that made them unpredictable and dangerous. The Galactic Council had restricted human expansion, not because humans were weak, but because they were afraid of what humans might do if given too much power. "The humans are monsters," Saluvis said slowly. "Every report describes them as violent and unpredictable, and bringing them into our space could make things worse rather than better." "With respect, Matriarch," Kethril replied, "things cannot possibly get worse. And the humans are the only species in range with a fleet powerful enough to make a difference." Saluvis considered this for a long moment. Her people were going to die, all 12 billion of them, consumed by a mindless swarm while the civilized galaxy watched and did nothing. What did she have to lose by asking monsters for help? "Send the transmission," she said finally. "Broadcast on all human frequencies and pray that their reputation is exaggerated." The message went out into the void, a desperate plea from a dying species to the most feared newcomers in galactic history. In the council chamber, Representative Thesic detected the broadcast and immediately brought it to the attention of her colleagues. "The Velith have contacted the humans," she announced, and genuine alarm colored her voice. "This is a serious breach of protocol, and we must consider the implications carefully." "The humans will not respond," Vorthel said confidently. "They are ruthless and self-interested, and the Velith have nothing to offer them. So why would they waste resources on a rescue mission?" The council murmured in agreement. Humans were predators, and predators did not help prey without expecting something in return. The logic was simple and seemingly unassailable. 6 hours later, that logic crumbled to dust. A human fleet, 17 warships and 43 transport vessels, changed course and accelerated toward Velith. Space at maximum speed, the flagship transmitted a simple message that was picked up by every listening post in the sector. "This is Admiral Unipark of the United Earth 3rd Expeditionary Fleet responding to the Velith distress call," the human commander announced, her voice calm and professional. "We are en route to your position with full evacuation capacity and combat capability, and we will arrive in 31 standard cycles. So hold on, because help is coming." In the council chamber, silence fell like a heavy blanket. The ruthless humans, the monsters of the galaxy, the species that every civilized world feared and distrusted, had answered a call for help from strangers who could offer nothing in return. Representative Thesic turned to her colleagues with confusion written across her shifting features. I do not understand, she said quietly. Why would they do this? No one had an answer on the Velith homeworld. High Matriarch Saluvis heard the human response and felt tears streaming down her face for the first time in days. She allowed herself to feel something other than despair. The monsters were coming to save her people, and she did not understand why. But she was grateful beyond words. She only hoped that the humans would arrive in time.